Hello, hope everyone's having a good time here. And thank you to Foss United for giving me such an opportunity to speak at this amazing event. So, as for this session, I wanted to talk a bit about my journey in developing Ducktape and open source game engine, and especially how Foss has helped me develop it for the past 1 year. So, first things first, a little bit about myself. I am Aryan, a high school student, and I've been programming for the past 3 years or so. I first started with Python, then went to JavaScript and C Sharp, and now I'm currently using C++ as my primary language, and while focusing on graphics programming. So, getting to the main topic, what is Ducktape? Well, going back the history, I think it was around mid 2020 or 2021. I was just getting into game development, and I started messing around with popular game engines such as Unity, Godot, and more. And then I realized that there are a lot of people out there who have the same issue as me, which is not being able to properly develop games on a not so high end PC. And that's what actually caused the idea. I wanted to make a C++ game engine that could run on most platforms, including Android and iOS, so that even those who do not possess a PC can create games. And I wanted to work on low-end hardware, such as mine that had 3 gigs of RAM and stuff. And I wanted to support old graphics APIs such as OpenGL 2 or 1. And lastly, I wanted to be beginner friendly. So those who are relatively new to programming are able to use the game engine as well. A few weeks after this idea, I started prototyping and messing around with various graphics libraries such as SFML, OpenGL, etc. And made a first commit on the 21st of September in 2021. Here's a little demo project that I made with that game engine. And throughout development, I thought it would be a good idea to build a community around the project so that I was not sure how it would help me at that time, but I thought it just might be a good idea and did start one. And as a result of that, there's around 135 users now and 80 stars on GitHub, 25 forks, and over 10 contributors on GitHub. And of course, maintaining a community has its own chores. So, in order to keep the community active and running, I hosted 2 game jams with around 45 participants in total. So, I realized the importance of having a community at the time of the release. After a few months of development, when I actually released the library on the 19th of February, as soon as I made the announcement about the release, around 20 people actually tested the library out for themselves. And at that time, I was able to find out a lot of bugs and issues, even though it was at the release. And with the help of the community, I was able to debug and resolve them all, and made a bug fix release on 13th of March 2022. And in the meantime, I also participated as a maintainer in the two Hacktoberfest in 2021 and 2022, and got around 10 PRs in the first one and 39 PRs in the Hacktoberfest that is going on right now as we speak. And that's also something I learned about force contribution. When I first put my GitHub project out to GitHub, I was initially under the impression that the people would actually contribute and the project would develop at a much faster rate. But in reality, it's actually that when people contribute to your project, most of the time is actually gone trying to help them contribute. So it's kind of a roundabout way of doing things, like you're helping other people do your work. But of course, it still has its own advantages, like your project will be alive in the open source community, which I think is a pretty big deal. And something I would also like to mention is the number of open source softwares and libraries that I used during development. like ECS with entity and NGUI async. Those are the major ones. And I also realized something about open source software from this. It's that they have a lot more to it than what I initially thought. The major advantages with using open source stuff is that, or especially open source libraries, is that since the code is completely open, you do not have to worry about legality issues such as copyright, and as long as you make sure to just include their license with your project. And it's that since the code is completely open, you do not have to worry about security or vulnerability issues at all. A couple of months after the release, I realized that the game engine actually had a lot more potential than when I started, or than being limited to a simple game engine that used old graphics APIs such as OpenGL 4. So I did a rewrite of the whole thing, and now it's a fully fledged C++ game engine using pure ECS powered by Entity, the library that Microsoft uses by Microsoft uses for ECS. And if you don't know what ECS is, it stands for Entity Component System, which is basically like a hierarchical arrangement of the things you have in a game. And I switched to OpenGL 4 for the as a graphics API because it's a lot more optimal than OpenGL 2 and a lot more performant as well. And I plan to add Vulkan direct support in the future. And something I found inconvenient with the old Ducktape is that developing games, especially those with physics, without an editor is extremely inconvenient because it's pretty much hard to understand what's where. So I made an MGUI powered editor that provides the user a easy to use front end to interface with the scene and edit game objects and stuff. And I integrated runtime native scripting, which seemed practical to use over Lua and interpreted language since performance is pretty critical for a game. And here's a little showcase of what it is now. As you can see, you can move around in the scene and move objects here and there. And there's a easier system from which you can select objects, and yeah, you can do pretty much any transformation manipulation. And there's also an inspector on the side from which you can edit the properties manually if you wanted to. And lastly, I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to speak on the stage once again. In the future, I would like to contribute, actively participate in partake in future FOSS United conferences, especially the KochiFOSS monthly conference that takes place. And I would love to contribute to other open source projects out there and have that be a part of it as well. Thank you.